Welcome back, my friends, to Faces of History, the podcast where we peel back the layers of polite legend and stare straight into the radioactive heart of the people who split atoms, cracked the old world in half, and paid the price for daring to touch the untouchable. I'm your host, the Duke of New York, and tonight we're stepping into a laboratory where the air hummed with invisible rays, glass vials glowed ghost green in the dark, and one woman, a poor immigrant, a mother, a widow, a genius, dared to stand at the edge of the known universe and say, "I will see what's there." Her name? Marie Curie. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the only human being ever to win it twice in two different sciences. A physicist, a chemist, a pioneer who cracked open the atom when most men wouldn't let her in the room. But her brilliance came at a price. She spent her life bathed in the invisible death she discovered. So pour yourself something strong, switch off the lights, and lean close, because tonight you're about to meet Marie Curie, the woman who glowed in the dark. All right, friends, let's wind the clock all the way back to November 7th, 1867. Picture Warsaw, not the bustling modern capital of Poland you might imagine today, but a city under the tight, suffocating grip of Imperial Russia. Imagine narrow cobblestone streets echoing with the heavy boots of Russian soldiers, the Polish language whispered in corners because teaching it openly could land you in prison, or worse. Into this world comes a girl named Maria Salomea Skłodowska, the youngest of 5 children born to Władysław and Bronisława Skłodowski, two proud, educated Poles who clung to learning as an act of rebellion. Her father taught math and physics, dangerous subjects for Poles under Russian rule. Her mother ran a prestigious girls' school until tuberculosis hollowed out her lungs and life. By the time little Maria, or Manya, as her family called her, was 10 years old, she had already buried her beloved mother and an older sister. Death wasn't an abstract lesson. It was real, close, personal. The family money was gone, wasted by Russian crackdowns on Polish schools. Her father lost his job more than once for pushing back against the Tsar's decrees. But the Skłodowskis had something stronger than fear: books. Manya was the kind of child who devoured knowledge like bread. By the age of 4, she could read fluently. By 10, she could recite entire poems by heart, solve math puzzles faster than most grown men, and speak multiple languages. She would curl up with a physics textbook under her covers by candlelight while the rest of Warsaw slept. And yet, even for a brilliant girl, the doors were locked tight. The Russian Empire did not allow women, especially Polish women, to study at university. A girl like Maria could either become a governess for the children of the Russian elite or join the so-called Flying University, a secret network of underground classes where Polish intellectuals taught banned subjects by candlelight, risking prison to feed hungry minds. At 15, when most girls were learning needlepoint, Maria was teaching herself advanced physics and sneaking into covert lectures where professors whispered forbidden truths about science, math, and Poland's dream of freedom. But brilliant minds need fuel, and money was always scarce. So at 17, Maria did what many smart, poor girls did. She went to work as a governess. For 6 years, she lived in other people's homes, tutoring spoiled children while saving every scrap of her tiny salary to help her older sister, Bronia. The plan was simple but bold. Maria would work, Bronia would go to medical school in Paris, then Bronia would help Maria do the same. And that's exactly what they did. The young governess, who once wept alone in cold attic rooms, scribbling equations on scrap paper by oil lamp, finally packed her battered trunk, scraped together her coins, and boarded a train west. Destination, the Sorbonne, in Paris, the only place in Europe where a woman like Maria could dare to become a scientist. She was 24, penniless, and about to step into a world that would devour her or make her immortal. So the girl from Warsaw arrived in Paris with 2 dresses, a dream, and a hunger that no empire could crush. The world just didn't know her name yet. Next up, we'll follow Maria Skłodowska, who would soon become Marie Curie, as she freezes in Parisian garrets, fights hunger, prejudice, and the dismissive shrugs of men who thought a woman's mind was too delicate for physics. Stay with me, because her story is only about to get more radioactive. All right, let's pick up our story in the winter of 1891. Picture this. A young Polish woman, thin as a rail, coat-patched at the elbows, stepping off a cramped train at the Gare du Nord. She's got a battered suitcase, a tiny bundle of money sewn into her hem, and eyes that burn like blue fire in the cold Paris mist. Her name on the university rolls would be Marie, a nod to her new home and new life. But Paris didn't care about her dreams. Paris at the time was a city of glittering salons and bone-crushing poverty, champagne and coal soot. For a poor foreign woman, it was more brutal than any battlefield. She found a tiny attic room in the Latin Quarter, not far from the Sorbonne. It was barely bigger than a closet. One bed, one rickety table, one cracked stove that she often couldn't afford to feed with coal. On winter nights, she'd pile every scrap of clothing she owned on top of her blanket to keep her teeth from chattering. Sometimes she'd eat nothing but bread and tea for days, saving her francs for books and lab fees instead. The Sorbonne itself was an icy fortress of stone and tradition. In 1891, women made up only a sliver of the student body. The sight of a young woman, a foreigner no less, sitting in lecture halls next to French gentlemen caused a low hum of scandal. Professors glanced overhead when asking questions. Classmates sneered. Some men called her La Polonaise in a tone that dripped with mockery. But here's the thing about Marie Curie. Mockery was fuel. She didn't flinch. Instead, she buried herself in books and experiments. She woke at dawn, memorized pages of physics by candlelight, then trudged through Paris's icy streets to the Sorbonne's stone lecture halls. She was studying physics and mathematics in French, a language she had only learned fully a few years before. Her notes were scribbled in a swirl of Polish, French, and Latin. She once said she didn't notice the cold in her attic because her mind burned too hot. In 1893, at 26, she earned her degree in physics, first in her class. Let me say that again, first in her class. Then she immediately enrolled for a second degree in mathematics, just for good measure. She supported herself by tutoring the children of wealthier students, some of whom she could outwit in the lab blindfolded. In the lecture halls of the Sorbonne, Marie made allies. A few professors who saw not just a Polish girl, but a once-in-a-generation mind. One of them connected her with a struggling French physicist named Pierre Curie. He was brilliant, shy, awkward, a man who had already done pioneering work on crystals and magnetism, but was quietly drifting in obscurity. In 1894, the two met in a lab crowded with clanking equipment and chemical fumes. And something clicked. Pierre offered Marie space to work in his lab, and Marie offered Pierre something he'd never had. A research partner who matched him idea for idea, calculation for calculation, heartbeat for heartbeat. They were married the next year, in a simple civil ceremony. No white dress, no fancy party. Marie wore a dark blue suit that doubled as her lab clothes. Instead of wedding rings, they gave each other notebooks and a promise. They would share everything: discoveries, failures, triumphs, and heartbreak. And so, in a drafty laboratory tucked away from the glittering boulevards of Paris, the Curies began the work that would change the world. Sifting through piles of pitchblende, searching for something no one else could see, convinced the atom still held secrets waiting to be unleashed. So the Polish governess with frostbitten fingers was now Marie Curie, Madame Curie. But she was about to become something else entirely, the woman who cracked open the atom's heart. Stay with me, because in the next part, we're going down into the darkness, where glass vials glow ghost green, and the word radioactivity is born. All right, so here we are, my friends, Paris, late 1890s. The Latin Quarter hums with gossip and debate about politics, philosophy, art. But behind a shabby doorway on the Rue Lomond, inside a drafty, leaking shed of a lab, two figures hunch over battered benches, eyes bloodshot, clothes stained with chemicals. Marie and Pierre Curie, husband and wife, partners in obsession. It all started with a curious glimmer, the strange invisible glow Henri Becquerel stumbled on in 1896 while studying phosphorescence. He found that uranium salts emitted a mysterious energy, a new kind of radiation that passed through solid objects and fogged photographic plates. Most scientists shrugged. Interesting, sure, but they thought it was just a quirk of uranium. Marie? She smelled something bigger. She decided to test every known element, every compound she could lay her hands on. She worked relentlessly, grinding minerals into powders, dissolving them in acid, measuring faint currents on a sensitive electrometer Pierre and his brother had invented years before. And what did she find? Pitchblende, a dull, black ore dug out of mines in Bohemia, used mostly for coloring pottery. But in pitchblende, Marie's instruments danced with readings far stronger than uranium alone could explain. Something else lurked in that heavy rock, something more powerful, more radioactive. So the Curies did what no one else would. They decided to tear pitchblende apart, atom by stubborn atom, until they could find the source of that invisible fire. And here's the gritty truth, my friends. They didn't have some gleaming lab with fancy equipment. They had a converted shed behind the School of Physics and Chemistry, once a medical school dissecting room, now a drafty ruin with a cracked glass roof. Rain dripped through holes while they worked. The air reeked of acid and burned skin. In the winter, they froze. In the summer, they sweated beside bubbling cauldrons of ore. For 4 years, they toiled like alchemists in rags. They hauled in tons, literal tons, of pitchblende. They smashed it with hammers, stirred it in iron cauldrons, boiled it for hours, then filtered the residues again and again. Over and over, they isolated heavier and heavier fractions, chasing that phantom glow. In 1898, they announced the discovery of a new element, polonium, named for Marie's lost homeland, Poland, still shackled under the boots of the Russian Empire. But polonium was just the beginning. They kept going, working day and night, often side by side in silence, so tired their hands shook when they lifted test tubes. Then came the real prize, radium, a new element, far more radioactive than anything known. The Curies proved it was real by isolating tiny specks of radium chloride, so tiny that Marie kept them in glass vials tucked in drawers. At night, the vials would glow with a ghostly blue-green light, the lab's only illumination when the lamps burned out. Visitors would later recall seeing the Curies in the dark, bent over their tables, skin pale in the eerie shine of their own discovery. What did it mean? It meant the atom, that supposedly indivisible speck of matter, wasn't solid at all. It hid unimaginable energy. It meant physics would never be the same. It meant X-rays, cancer treatments, atomic bombs, nuclear energy. All of it began with the woman stirring vats of pitchblende in a leaky Paris shed. For their work, the Curies and Becquerel won the 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics. Marie was the first woman ever to stand on that stage in Stockholm. She had to be practically dragged there. Pierre, always shy, wanted to skip the fame. But when Marie stepped up, she did it for every woman shut out of labs. Every girl told her mind was too weak for equations. She spoke softly, but carried the force of radioactive decay itself. And she wasn't done. After Pierre's tragic death, hit by a horse-drawn cart on a rainy Paris street in 1906, Marie took over his professorship, becoming the first woman to teach at the Sorbonne. She pushed forward alone, isolating pure radium metal for the first time in 1910, winning a second Nobel, this time in chemistry. But the hidden cost was already eating her alive. They didn't know back then what we know now, that the same invisible glow that lit up her lab at night was slowly destroying her cells by day. Her notebooks, her lab equipment, they're still so radioactive you can't touch them without protective gear. So there she was, the girl from Warsaw who braved cold Paris nights, the poor student who built her kingdom out of boiling vats and shattered atoms, now the most famous scientist in Europe. But the world she cracked open, it came at a price she would pay with every breath. Stay with me, because next we follow Marie Curie into war zones, X-ray trucks, and the final chapter of a life lived in the glow of the future. So let's stand here for a moment, my friends. Paris, 1903. The shed behind the School of Physics and Chemistry still reeks of acids and burning pitchblende. Marie and Pierre Curie, rail-thin, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, have cracked open the secrets of radium and polonium. They're not just scientists anymore. They're revolutionaries in lab coats. Word of their discovery rips through Europe's scientific circles like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, everyone wants to see the Curie's glowing glass tubes, their liquid sunshine. Papers are published, lecture invitations pour in. But here's the kicker. The fame that's coming for Marie is not something she ever asked for, and in many ways, she never wanted it. Let's remember who she was, a Polish immigrant in Paris. A woman scientist in a world that barely let women into the lecture halls, let alone gave them professorships or prizes. When the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences decided to award the 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics, their plan was to honor Henri Becquerel for discovering natural radioactivity and Pierre Curie for his brilliant work alongside him. But Pierre, devoted, stubborn Pierre, refused to accept it unless Marie's name was added. He knew the truth. The long nights, the endless measurements, the notebooks scrawled with calculations, the burns on their skin. It was Marie who pushed deeper, who refused to accept the ordinary explanations. She wasn't his assistant. She was his equal. And he made the world admit it. So in December of 1903, Marie Curie, born Maria Sklodowska in a crumbling Warsaw under Russian rule, became the first woman in history to win a Nobel Prize. And not just any prize, the highest honor science could bestow. Picture it, Stockholm, the icy wind blowing through the grand halls of the Swedish Academy, bearded scholars in white tie and tails. And there, small, solemn, stubborn, stands Marie Curie, a slip of a woman who looked more like a school teacher than a revolutionary physicist. She barely spoke during the ceremony. She hated crowds, hated fuss. Her mind was already turning back to the lab, to the next experiment, the next unanswered question. But the world had other plans. The newspapers splashed her face across front pages. Madame Curie, the radium queen. Invitations to speak came from all over Europe, and with the prize came money, enough to free the Curies from the worst of their financial worries, at least for a time. But here's the thing about fame. It doesn't come without a cost. As radium's powers became known, its ghostly glow, its promise as a cure for cancer, the demand for it exploded. The Curie's tiny lab turned into a revolving door for scientists, journalists, curiosity seekers. Radium became the element of the moment, a fad that spread far beyond science. Companies bottled radioactive water, made radium face creams, radium toothpaste, even radium chocolates. And while entrepreneurs cashed in, Marie refused to patent her process. She could have become fantastically wealthy, a radium baroness. But she and Pierre gave it away freely. They believed science should belong to everyone, not be locked behind patents. But this moment, this bright, flickering moment of triumph, didn't last long. The invisible enemy they'd unleashed was eating away at their bodies. Pierre, already frail, coughed constantly. His hands were covered with sores. He was always exhausted. Marie, too, pushed herself past the limits of any ordinary human being. They were both so thin you could almost see the outline of their bones under their clothes. And then came the cruel twist, the moment that would split Marie Curie's life in two. On April 19, 1906, Pierre was crossing the Rue Dauphine in the pouring rain, mind lost in thought. Maybe about radium, maybe about his students. A horse-drawn wagon rounded the corner. Pierre slipped. The heavy wheels crushed his skull. Just like that, the man who had stood beside her at the birth of a new physics was gone in the wet Paris mud. For days, Marie locked herself away. She wrote in her journal as if Pierre could still hear her. I put my head against the wall. I cried for you. I called you. You did not come back. The woman who had lifted radium out of raw ore now had to lift herself out of grief that threatened to drown her. But here's what makes Marie Curie a face of history, not just a footnote. She did not break. She did not retreat. Instead, she stepped into Pierre's shoes, literally. She took his professorship at the Sorbonne, the first woman ever to teach there. She raised their two daughters alone, one of whom, Irene, would grow up to win her own Nobel Prize. She turned back to the lab, her sanctuary, her battlefield, and she kept going. Radium still glowed in the dark drawers. Invisible rays still whispered secrets no man or woman had fully grasped yet, and Marie, wrapped in mourning black, would drag those secrets into the light if it killed her. So that's where we find her now, the widow of physics, the mother of radium, the scientist who turned fame and heartbreak into fuel. Stay right there, my friends, because next we'll follow her through scandal, war, and one final Nobel that would seal her name in the bedrock of history. So here she is, my friends, Marie Curie, a widow draped in black, mother of two girls, standing alone at the chalkboard of the Sorbonne, the first woman ever to teach there. It was 1906, and her students stared at her in shock. Some probably thought it was a joke. A woman teaching physics? But when she picked up the chalk, they leaned in. They had to, because behind her eyes, the secrets of the atom waited to be unlocked. Marie kept Pierre's office exactly as he left it, his chair, his notes, his old pipe on the desk, and she buried herself in work the way some people pray, because for her, the laboratory was church and battlefield at once. She pushed the boundaries of radioactivity, a word she herself coined. She refined radium, studied its medical power, watched it burn tumors, even as it ate into her bones. Then came the scandal. You won't read this in the polite schoolbook versions, but here's the truth. In 1910, 4 years after Pierre's death, Marie fell in love again. This time with Paul Langevin, a brilliant physicist, a married man, a scandal in a starched collar. When the newspapers found out, they didn't see the world's greatest scientist. They saw a foreign woman, Polish, atheist, stubborn, seducing a good French husband. They called her immoral, a homewrecker, a radical. They didn't care that Langevin's marriage was broken long before Marie came along. They wanted a story, and she gave them one by refusing to hide. She holed up in her lab, wrote letters to Langevin under assumed names, and refused to run. When mobs gathered outside her house, chanting for her to leave France, she stayed. When the Swedish Academy offered her a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for isolating pure radium, people told her to refuse it. She showed up anyway, collected the medal, spoke softly, clearly, fiercely. 2 Nobel Prizes. No one, man or woman, had ever done it. No one has done it quite like her since. Then came the Great War. 1914, the world cracked open like an atom splitting in a cloud of gas and wire and blood. France called its men to the trenches and called its women to the kitchens and the hospitals. But Marie, she didn't just roll bandages or melt scrap metal for the war effort. She saw another way to fight. She invented something the soldiers called petites curies, little curies, mobile X-ray units. She packed X-ray machines into trucks, taught herself to drive, rolled them right up to the front lines. She and her daughter, Arain, just a teenager, trained doctors and nurses to find bullets in broken bodies. Tens of thousands of wounded soldiers owe their lives to that soft, stubborn woman, hunched over glowing screens in makeshift tents and muddy fields. Imagine it. A battlefield at midnight. Shells falling somewhere beyond the trees, and in a canvas tent a flicker of light, an X-ray beam cutting through flesh and bone, guided by the same hands that once stirred pitchblende in a garden shed. When the war ended, Marie Curie wasn't done. She raised funds for a Radium Institute, a fortress of pure research and medical breakthroughs. She trained the next generation, including Arain, who would share a Nobel with her own husband for discovering artificial radioactivity. Marie gave her name, her time, her life's work to this cause. Science for everyone. But the price had already come due. She had spent decades bathed in rays no one fully understood. There were no lead aprons, no Geiger counters. Her notebooks are still too radioactive to handle without protection, even today. The invisible light she coaxed from the earth glowed in her bones. In 1934, she fell ill, aplastic anemia. Her blood turned traitor, cells broken by decades of exposure. She checked herself into a sanatorium in the Alps. No radium there, no lab, just mountain air, snow, and silence. She died on July 4th, 1934. Fitting, maybe, that the woman who lit up the atom left on a day that celebrates independence. She left behind no fortune, just a legacy that burns brighter than any element she discovered. Laboratories, institutes, cancer treatments, scientific daughters and granddaughters. A world she helped crack open, for better or worse. So picture it, friends. The ghost glow in the lab, the X-rays at the front, the notebooks humming with death and discovery. Marie Curie didn't just split the atom. She split the old world in half and showed us what the invisible could do, for good, for ruin, for wonder. Stay close, because in our final moments tonight, we'll ask the question that lingers in every glowing page of her story. Was the price of progress worth the life that paid for it? Keep your seat. So here we are, my friends, standing at the threshold between the past and the fallout that never really settles. Because when we talk about Marie Curie, we're not just talking about a woman hunched over beakers of pitchblende, or a widow in black, or a pair of tired eyes watching an X-ray beam flicker on the Western Front. We're talking about something bigger, a legacy still burning, sometimes too bright to stare at directly. Let's start with the obvious. Every time you or I step into a hospital for an X-ray, an MRI, a round of radiation therapy, you're standing in the shadow of Curie's work. She didn't invent X-rays, but she gave them purpose, pushed them into battlefield tents and surgical theaters. She gave us radium, polonium, elements that reshaped medicine, industry, even how we understand the fabric of matter. But it's more than machines and test tubes, it's people. Marie's own daughter, Irene Joliot-Curie, carried the torch forward, discovering artificial radioactivity. Another Nobel. Another generation burned bright and paid. Irene died of leukemia at 58, the same unseen rays threading through her bones. Even today, Curie's lab notebooks are locked away in lead-lined boxes at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, too hot to handle without protective gear. Her personal papers, her letters, the cookbooks she scribbled in, all of it hums with the echo of her life's work. Think about that. Imagine your diaries so dangerous they have to be read through glass with gloves because your passion still pulses with invisible fire. That's Marie Curie's legacy and her warning. But it wasn't just science. It was what she meant to science. In the late 1800s, women were told they couldn't vote, couldn't run for office, couldn't dream too big. But here was this Polish girl, the daughter of a failed teacher, an immigrant washing lab glassware to survive in Paris, who sat at the table of giants and made them listen. She didn't knock politely at the door of the laboratory. She built her own door. She demanded a seat in the male-dominated academies. She taught students at the Sorbonne, the first woman to do so. She trained a generation of researchers who would keep pushing the atom until it split under their hands and unleashed a power even she could not have foreseen. The same discoveries that fight cancer today also gave the world the bomb, the mushroom cloud, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the Cold War's silent dread. It's the contradiction at the heart of the Curie legacy. She opened the box, and the good and the terrible spilled out in equal measure. She never lived to see the nuclear age, but it breathes her name. Every reactor, every Geiger counter, every warning sign painted with a radiation symbol that looks almost like a mocking grin. Yet she didn't flinch from any of it. When asked if she feared what she'd found, she shrugged off the question. For her, curiosity was never something to be fenced in by fear. And that's the heartbeat of her story. The courage to look into the invisible and say, I want to know. In the decades since, countless women in STEM have looked to Marie Curie as proof that intellect has no gender, that a kitchen table can become a laboratory, that the world can bow to your mind if you refuse to bend to its rules. Walk through any university physics lab today. You'll find her portrait tucked on the wall. A black and white reminder that once a girl from Warsaw stepped across borders, cracked open rocks, and taught the world that what you can't see might be the most powerful force of all. Marie Curie didn't just do science, she changed science. She made it bigger, more daring, more human. So the next time you pass an X-ray room or hear the word radiation or see a Nobel Prize gleaming on a museum shelf, remember, that glow isn't just radium, it's Marie herself, still burning, still humming in the dark. Because legacy isn't marble statues and bronze busts, it's a question, still echoing in every lab, every hospital, every spark of curiosity. What price are you willing to pay to see what no one else can see? Stay right where you are, friends. We'll close this night with one last toast to the woman who made the invisible visible and made sure the whole world would never be the same. That's Marie Curie, the woman who glowed in the dark, the girl from Warsaw who changed the world atom by atom and taught us that discovery always comes with a price. If you learned something tonight, share this story, subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends that Faces of History doesn't just teach, it glows. I'm the Duke of New York. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the most dangerous light is the one you can't see. Good night.